Victorian-era hygiene and bathing practices. You're watching Cultured Elegance. Make sure to like and subscribe. A good benchmark for understanding hygiene in any historical period is simple. How often did people wash? In the Victorian era, attitudes toward cleanliness underwent a seismic shift. Under Queen Victoria's reign, 1837 to 1901, personal hygiene became more than a matter of health. It evolved into a moral imperative, influenced by Christianity, industrial capitalism, and the burgeoning middle class. Cleanliness came to symbolize self-discipline, respectability, and even patriotism. Public health reformers like Edwin Chadwick linked sanitation with virtue, arguing that clean people made for a strong and civilized nation. A clean body was increasingly seen as a reflection of a clean conscience. Yet by modern standards, daily washing remained minimal and significantly different to how we do so today. How Victorians bathed. In most households of the time, bathing was considered a task, not a treat. True bathrooms, as we think of them today, were uncommon before the 1890s. Instead, everyday hygiene relied on a pitcher of water and a porcelain or metal basin, usually placed in the bedroom or dressing room. Full-body baths were rare and typically reserved for once a week, or even once a month. From the Georgian and Regency periods through the height of the Victorian era, this humble basin and pitcher set remained the cornerstone of cleanliness. Whether in a London townhouse, a countryside cottage, or even an aristocrat's private chambers, this simple duo was the most practical and widespread solution before indoor plumbing became the norm. A typical ceramic or porcelain pitcher held about 1 to 2 gallons of water, just enough for a person to manage pouring without help. In the morning, a maid would bring it up freshly filled with warm water. After a long day of travel or toil, the ritual might be repeated. The water would be poured into the matching basin, where one could splash their face or soak a flannel, what we'd call a washcloth today, to wipe down the neck, hands, underarms, and feet. This method, thorough and targeted, was often as effective as a full bath. In fact, across the world today, it still remains the standard method of washing. Before terry cloth was invented in the mid-19th century, towels were made from smooth, absorbent, woven linen. They didn't fluff, but they dried quickly and were easy to wash and reuse. On washstands, one might also find a sponge, a cake of soap, and a little holder for a soap ball, the common form for soap before industrial pressing molds took over. As for furniture, a basin and pitcher could rest on a simple sideboard, a corner dresser, or, if the budget allowed, a purpose-built washstand with towel racks and drawers. In wealthier homes, these washstands were crafted from fine woods and fitted with marble tops or ceramic insets. Despite the apparent limitations, washing with a basin and pitcher could keep one quite clean. Hygiene depended more on consistency and technique than equipment, and for most of the 18th and 19th centuries, this humble setup remained the bedrock of daily cleanliness, even as clawfoot tubs and plumbing slowly crept into the upper echelons of society. The wealthiest households, particularly those in newer townhouses, built in the latter half of the century, might include actual bathrooms, equipped with early indoor plumbing. A rare few featured porcelain bathtubs with copper fittings and plumbed hot and cold taps, considered the height of luxury. Some aristocratic homes even featured gas-heated tubs, a marvel of convenience, but a hazard in practice. Accidental scaldings in gas fires were not uncommon. Women sometimes wore their shifts in the bathtub, most likely because the tubs themselves were either wooden or metal, and therefore freezing. Either way, not exactly inviting. As for why women wore shifts in the water, I suspect it's because the bath wasn't primarily about scrubbing up. It was more of a leisurely ritual. Think of how people today spend an hour reading in the tub with candles. If it took a couple of servants a lot of time to haul and heat the water, you weren't just hopping in and out. Washing with a basin and pitcher was a solitary business, but bathing in a tub? That was a bit more of an ordeal, and sometimes even a social occasion. Take Le Bain by Romanet from 1774. It shows just that. Marie Antoinette once wrote, "I dictate from my bath, into which I have just thrown myself, to support, at least, my physical strength. I can say nothing of the state of my mind." But perhaps the shift was worn for modesty's sake. If your bathroom was full of servants, bustling in and out while you were soaking away for an hour or more, tossing a linen layer over yourself would have been the polite and practical thing to do. Bathing by class. In lower-income families, one bath was shared among all members, typically in descending order of seniority. Father bathed first, then mother, and so on, with the youngest children last. Public bathhouses, which began to appear in the 1840s following the 1846 Public Baths and Washhouses Act, provided the working poor with affordable access to warm water and some degree of privacy. These municipal facilities were often gender segregated and could include laundry areas, making them vital community resources. In Scotland and parts of the north of England, steam baths or wash houses with boiler rooms became a regular feature in industrial cities like Liverpool and Glasgow, as urban reformers fought for improved public hygiene. The smell of society. Without modern deodorants or daily showers, were Victorians as odorous as we imagine? Not necessarily, at least not if they could avoid it, because smell was closely associated with class. Appearing fresh, or at least unoffensive, was crucial to one's social standing. Scent was a key part of presentation. Ladies carried vinaigrettes, small containers with perfumed sponges, to mask unpleasant odors, while men often applied bay rum or lavender water to their hands and neck. Scented powders made from orris root, starch, or even crushed chalk were dusted beneath arms and on linens to absorb sweat. When powders weren't available, baking soda and vinegar served as rudimentary odor fighters. Victorian undergarments were another defense. Layers such as chemises and petticoats absorbed sweat and oil from the body, sparing more expensive outer garments. These base layers were laundered frequently, sometimes weekly, while dresses and suits might go untouched for months. Women's gowns often featured detachable underarm pads or dress shields to prevent staining. How did people actually stay clean? In France, the tradition of public bathhouses never truly disappeared. For a modest fee, one could enjoy a private room with running hot and cold water, a deep tub, warm towels, a fireplace, and even a menu of bath oils and refreshments. Some establishments had shared bathing pools or swimming lessons on offer as well. To traveling Englishmen and women, unaccustomed to such comforts, these Parisian bathhouses were nothing short of miraculous. Back home in England, the situation was more austere. Most people cleaned themselves with a simple basin and pitcher of water. Those with means might have a portable tin or copper tub brought to their room, a small affair placed on the floor, filled by hand and drained with care. Only in the wealthiest homes did bathing become more than a matter of necessity. Outdoor bathing. If bathing in a tub was often done out of duty, then bathing outdoors was its carefree cousin, an indulgence in delight rather than hygiene. On warm days, it wasn't unusual to see groups of spirited young people enjoying a splash in the local river. It was a common enough pastime that Paris officials felt compelled to issue an ordinance forbidding nude bathing in the Seine, but only near the bridges, where the risk of scandalizing the public was evidently too great. Even across the Atlantic, the habit was alive and well. Based on period accounts and a broad survey of visual evidence, it appears that full-body bathing, where one actually submerged themselves rather than simply wading, was generally reserved for the young, and the sexes were almost always kept separate. By the Victorian era, sea bathing was extremely fashionable and medically prescribed. This new vogue brought with it a curious invention, the bathing machine. These were sturdy wooden cabins mounted on high wheels, drawn by horse into the sea. From the shore, a bather would enter the machine, undress in privacy, and then step directly into the waves from the sea-facing door, ideally shielded from view. Tobias Smollett described them in 1771. Imagine to yourself a small, snug wooden chamber fixed upon a wheel carriage. The bather enters, disrobes, and is drawn out to sea, where they plunge in, then return to dress in comfort, all without ever having been exposed to the beach-going public. Men generally bathed in the nude, children as well, just as they often do today on the continent. Women, however, wore long flannel shifts, sometimes weighted at the hem with lead to prevent the fabric from floating upward. On most beaches, men and women were carefully segregated, and attendants were present to assist bathers, and, more importantly, to keep anyone from drowning, a real hazard when you're swaddled in a soaking wet flannel. Oral hygiene. Toothbrushes did exist, typically made with bone or ivory handles and stiff boar bristle heads. These tools were used with tooth powders, an early form of toothpaste, often homemade or purchased from apothecaries. Common ingredients included crushed charcoal, chalk, baking soda, salt, and even powdered cuttlefish bone. Some recipes added mint or myrrh for freshness. Commercial tooth powders gained popularity as cleanliness became a middle-class virtue. By the late 19th century, toothpaste in jars and eventually tubes began to appear, especially in more urban, affluent households. Fashion versus function. With corsets, bustles, and crinolines, it's easy to wonder how Victorian women navigated the most basic bodily needs. Fortunately, women's clothing was designed with practicality in mind, at least beneath the surface. Drawers were crotchless, a detail often overlooked in costume dramas, allowing women to attend to personal needs without removing multiple layers. The ever-useful chamber pot, kept under the bed or within a commode chair, provided a convenient indoor option. For added privacy, some parlors even included folding screens or curtained alcoves. Men also used chamber pots, particularly in upper-floor bedrooms. The contents were discreetly emptied, often by servants, into cesspits, courtyards, or public drains. In rural areas, outhouses remained the norm well into the 20th century. The toilet trouble. The flush toilet was invented by Sir John Harrington in the 16th century, but only gained traction in Victorian Britain during the latter half of the 19th century. Early adopters included aristocratic households and forward-thinking architects. By the 1880s, Thomas Crapper's plumbing innovations, including the ball cock valve, helped standardize the flushing mechanism, though the extent of his contribution has been mythologized. However, for most Victorians, indoor plumbing was a fantasy. Tenement dwellers and even many middle-class homes relied on outdoor privies, which were often shared among multiple households. In dense cities like Manchester or Birmingham, hundreds might share just a handful of toilets. Chamber pots were the indoor alternative, but once full, their contents had to go somewhere. In many urban areas, that somewhere was the street, the basement, or the nearest river. The Great Stink. Nowhere was this sanitary crisis more disastrous than in London. For centuries, the River Thames had doubled as a drinking source and open sewer. By 1858, decades of industrial waste, human excrement, and animal carcasses had transformed it into a toxic soup. That summer, a particularly intense heat wave amplified the stench to unbearable levels. Curtains soaked in chloride of lime were hung in Parliament in a futile effort to keep out the smell, but it was no use. The government had to act. Enter Joseph Bazalgette, the chief engineer of London's Metropolitan Board of Works, His ambitious new sewer system, completed in the 1860s, laid over 1,100 miles of underground brick tunnels to redirect waste safely downstream. It saved countless lives and helped kickstart modern public sanitation systems. By the late Victorian era, breakthroughs like Pasteur's germ theory and Lister's antiseptic methods reshaped public understanding of hygiene. Soap became affordable, cleanliness campaigns gained traction, and the modern rituals of bathing and sanitation took root. By the early 20th century, Victorian ideals had quietly laid the foundation for everything from hot running water to deodorant and flush toilets. So the next time you enjoy these modern comforts, spare a thought for those who came before, who, lacking mouthwash and antibacterial wipes, still believed that cleanliness, however imperfect, was a mark of decency and progress. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member. It really helps us continue creating more elegant, history-rich content. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, and I'll see you in the next one.